Welcome to Good Times Home Videos Collector's Edition of our World War II series. I'm Brigadier General Stan Ulanoff. In this edition of our library series, we'll focus on 4 dramatic, striking air attacks that led the U.S. to final victory in Europe. You'll fly over mud-soaked Italy, battling the Germans at San Pietro and Cassino. You'll prepare for D-Day with the largest direct assault on the powerful German Luftwaffe. You'll witness spectacular combat photography of U.S. fighters and bombers attacking and strafing the Nazis until the final capitulation, where the Germans stood totally defeated. Good Times Home Video brings you the historic adventure of the mightiest fighting team, what was the U.S. Army Air Force.
November 8, 1942, the Mediterranean. 11 months after Pearl Harbor, more than 800 ships engaged in Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa. The plan called for tactical air support for the ground forces. Some of the air units were ferried from England and the States by carriers.
We had 70 Warhawks on a U.S. flat top, 25 more on a British carrier. We liked this plane. The Curtiss P-40 could carry a 500-pound bomb as easily as a belly gas tank. It was both a fighter and a bomber. Now, inspired by Doolittle's Tokyo raid, land-trained fighter pilots, because their planes were urgently needed, were risking carrier takeoffs to get to Morocco. At 2- and 3-minute intervals, we raced down the short deck and grabbed for air. Felt like someone pulled the runway out from under us awful fast. We cleared the decks and buzzed the carriers for luck. Then the entire group, led by Colonel Bill Momeyer, headed for the already battle-scarred landing fields of French Morocco. General Eisenhower came up for a look-see at our forward command post. Allied forces had rolled over the opposition and moved halfway across North Africa, only to grind to a halt because of weather and the lack of supplies. We were almost within sight of the enemy's big supply ports in Tunisia. However, logistics and mud dictated the decision. On General Eisenhower's order, positions were consolidated and the attack was postponed indefinitely. The mountains, the roads, even the air seemed to ooze with 6 weeks of steady rain. No motor transportation. Wheels went no place. Only a few meager supplies got through. For once, like the foot soldier, air support, the umbrella for our ground forces, was stuck in the mud.
The enemy was in much better shape. They had hundreds of planes operating from permanent all-weather fields. Their veteran, battle-trained Luftwaffe was sure of easy victory over inexperienced American air units. Allied harbors and airfields were primary targets. Air defenses were weak, open for Stuka dive bombing and strafing. After plastering Allied supply harbors, they attacked airfields. Air units doggedly held on while even the ground seemed to rise and burn under repeated attacks. The Allies suffered losses, and even as they rescued their wounded, new and faster ways were improvised to carry casualties to safety. The planes which had brought in high-priority supplies took out higher-priority men. They were attended by flight nurses. With their evacuation, casualties were only hours from hospitals, even home. But wounded men and planes had to be repaired. American ingenuity went to work. Salvaged parts and new ideas made crude gasoline firebombs. The Allies rebuilt their strength.
General Ike had planned strategy with his air, ground, and naval officers. We worked out the best ways of using our combined forces. General Spots was named CO of the Northwest African Air Force. Generals Arnold, Royce, and Brereton visited our outfit, the 12th Air Force Fighter Command, run by General Pete Quesada. The brass were helping us get on even terms with the Luftwaffe. Army transport boys tripled railway capacity. A while back, we'd nearly run out of 500-pounders, but now we had plenty. Gasoline rationed at home meant life or death in the desert. A battle for supply was being won. We were getting ready.
Suddenly, on February 14th, Rommel's Africa Corps attacked. At Kasserine Pass, Allied lines stiffened. After 8 days of attack, the Axis initiative was exhausted. It was at this point that Rommel quit his African command.
For the enemy, the situation worsened. Gasoline shortages reduced air operations. Squeezed into a steadily smaller pocket, they prepared to evacuate planes and key personnel to Sicily. About 20 men could escape in a Junker 52.
High above them, the Allies watched and waited. Something big was coming. The German escape plan was put in motion. Near Tunis rose a group of more than 30 heavily armored Me-109 fighters. They were to escort a large fleet of slow-flying 52s. The hop to Sicily was a shuttle run of about 100 miles, less than an hour. 100 strong, the transport stretched in a long line on the deck, headed for their Sicilian sanctuary.
They didn't get very far. As soon as our 57th Fighter Group spotted them, Captain Jimmy Curl's squad of 13 P-40s dove on the enemy to split them up. We had been chasing Germans since July 1942, but we never had a chance like this famous afternoon. Down below, the transports droned on. If their luck held, the Germans might make a getaway. Their luck ran out. The tail-end Charlies of the long escape line took their chances on getting back to their Cape Bon airdromes. Some of them made it the hard way. When the attack was over, we had destroyed 58 transports and 18 fighters. Lieutenants Duffy, Powers, and Cleveland each clobbered 5 transports. From then on, we sat over German airdromes and dared the Luftwaffe to come up.
But the Axis still had a trump card. The Africa Corps blocked the way to Tunis. The Allies probed, seeking weak spots. Finding some, they shifted forces, building for a breakthrough. Montgomery's army hammered the Afrika Korps from the south. Allied artillery tried to give the ground forces a toehold on the corridor to Tunis. But Monty's 8th Army was effectively pinned down by the Afrika Korps.
On the morning of May 6th, they called for tactical air support. Weather was good. We had gasoline and bombs, planes and men. We were ready. The Northwest African Tactical Air Force drew up a schedule for an unprecedented weight of air attack. The heavies were first to give depth to the artillery barrage. They ordered us to concentrate on an area 4 miles long by 3.5 miles wide. We had 12th Air Force bomber boys who had started in the muddy fields of Algeria. They were teamed up with 9th Air Force men who had eaten sand all the way from Egypt, 1,500 miles. Before 9 o'clock, we had planned to fly more than 1,000 sorties. Anything that could take off went up to the corridor. Our fighter bomber boys, including the 57th Group of Cape Bone fame, were about to sweep a road to Tunis. We were using the experience gained in Egypt, smashing Rommel at El Alamein. Then we were only a few. Now we were hundreds, all grouped in a powerful package. General Alexander's armies were anxious for the air attack, which would mean a breakthrough. They didn't have long to wait. We blasted a channel from Medjez El Bab to Tunis. In 2 hours, tanks and infantry had advanced as much as a mile. Resistance began to crack. Firebombs, which we had tested in the Sahara, helped in the big show. The Germans, realizing their desperate situation, retreated to make a last-ditch stand.
Finally, the Allied armies broke through. From here on, Alexander mopped up with fire. At last, the Allies could see Tunis. This was the first flush of victory. A year and a half after Pearl Harbor, only 6 months after the landing. Allied soldiers, tankmen, and airmen were liberators, like the American Marines who had brought peace to North Africa more than a century before. There were salutes to liberty as tyranny disappeared. The citizens of Tunis cheered the crusade for freedom that now had a new champion, Allied air power. 250,000 prisoners proved that Nazi invincibility was a myth. In the German defeat, we learned the strength of joint unified command. Allied air power had destroyed enemy planes, guns, and ships, which paved the way for the final destruction of Hitler's once proud and powerful Afrika Korps. As designer of the Tunisian victory, General Eisenhower reviewed the United Allies who were at last upon the march. The world had seen the first large-scale application of complete air supremacy. We had battle-tested and developed tactical air support for our ground forces. Later chapters will show the lessons of North African air warfare applied on a global scale with the steadily increasing manpower, plane power, and firepower of the United States Air Force. 1943, Italy. The Allies had won a toehold on Europe. After bloody Salerno, prime objective was Foggia, an array of Nazi-Italian airfields strategically close to the heart of Germany.
Early the next year, General Spaatz came to Foggia to inspect us. Nate Twining's new outfit, the 15th Air Force. General Aker was taking over command of the Mediterranean theater. The brass met to plan air support, the keystone for Allied armies on the road to Rome.
Winter rains made sunny Italy a sea of mud. Taking 61 days to travel 8 miles, the Fifth Army inched its way up the boot. Their order was, push north through the German lines and liberate Rome.
Every day at 0600, the 12th Air Force reported for tactical missions. Fighting the same winter weather, we were handed the grim job of blasting a hole through the Gustav Line. We fighter pilots were the sword point of the new Mediterranean Allied Air Forces. Forged in Africa, tempered in Pantelleria, and blooded in Sicily, the 12th was now put to the big test. Italy, no soft underbelly, was defended by at least 24 tough German divisions. We had 11. To balance the opposing forces, we mounted daily strikes to protect our tanks, to clear a path for our infantry. Although weather, terrain, and Nazis had finally stopped our armies, they never stopped us. There was no mud in the sky. Allied air power and Allied ground power had been welded into an effective team to defeat the enemy's greater forces. Our plan called for steady ground pressure to be synchronized with strong airstrikes. American airmen were taking off to buzz the Appian Way, the ancient highway trod by Caesar's triumphant legions of old. It was our job to open the rugged road to Rome. Blocking the way were minefields, occupied villages, protected by Nazi airdromes and Nazi tanks.
Support wasn't easy. On the mainland, the enemy had all his resources at hand. Here was a network of rails and roads that had to be cut before our own troops, stymied on the narrow mountainous peninsula, could move. Even Army mules had difficulty climbing Italy's rocky backbone. Allied forces, which now included some Italians, measured our advances in mountaintops instead of miles. San Pietro, like dozens of other German-held towns, was caught in a tight net of artillery fire. At times, our men felt they were on the long end of a forgotten front. But in spite of terrain, weather, and dug-in Nazis, the Fifth Army kept up the pressure. From village to village, from mountain to mountain, it was the same bitter action. Attacks and advances. They approached Cassino, gateway to Rome. This was one of those bitter moments born by war. High atop Monastery Hill in the Abbey of Monte Cassino, the godless Nazis had installed an observation post, and from there followed the movements of Allied soldiers below. Relying on the reluctance of the Allies to damage the Abbey, the Germans dominated the Liri Valley. From the sacred citadel itself, they tried to destroy the forces of freedom by directing concentrations of accurate and murderous fire. American Fifth Army artillery hammered back. Stalemated by the enemy's unique position, the road to Rome was blocked.
After weeks of investigation, including personal reconnaissance over Monte Cassino by Generals Acre and Devers, the Allies decided we would bomb and shell the Nazi-held town and abbey. For tactical reasons, Acre was opposed to the bombing. Instead, he favored using air to strangle enemy supply. But Allied leaders felt the continued sacrifice of our own men must stop. Everything else having failed, the Allies ordered air power to neutralize the Nazi observation post.
Worried Germans heard the first wave drone overhead. Like rabbits, the enemy darted into surrounding caves and tunnels carved into solid rock. Long prepared, their Gustav line pivoted on fortified Cassino, the town as well as the abbey, which the Germans had made a military target. But the enemy survived the bombing. Fanatic, they still had the will to fight. Up from their tunnels, their bunkers, up into the ruins, their tough paratroopers quickly regrouped. In minutes, they re-established their strong points. The Germans were back in business. Rubble as well as Nazis blocked the way.
Air leaders finally convinced everyone that the only way we could crack the Gustav line was to choke off the enemy's flow of supplies south of Rome. The operation was aptly named Strangle. In March, those of us flying for the 12th and 15th Air Forces began to deliver a series of blows against rail yards, tracks, trains, and bridges, especially bridges. In Italy, there were more than 40,000 bridges. Allowing the enemy no sanctuary, Operation Strangle was successful from the start. We hunted enemy trains and cut their lines in more than 100 places. top, we hunted trucks and ships. We strangled enemy supply. On May 11th, we opened a new air and ground drive, a big one. We had the enemy on the run. 3 days later, our Fifth Army cracked the Gustav Line. It had taken 7 weeks to cut his main arteries and let enemy supply bleed to death. Mobility, the heart of German ground strength, was stymied. All his bridges were falling down. In the words of General Mark Clark, with the splendid effort of our Air Force, we put the enemy on the road.
Allied forces had triumphed at a price. Part of it, 9,000 airmen. But the road to Rome was open at last. There were cheers from grateful Romans for the weary men who had exploded through the tight enemy ring at Anzio's bloody beachhead. Now, after 9 months of brutal war, half of once Nazi-dominated Italy was free, and the Eternal City opened its arms. Out of Casino and Operation Strangle came new lessons in the application of air power. In the forthcoming Prelude to the Normandy Invasion, you will see these hard-won lessons and tactics sharpened by the now campaign-wise United States Air Force. January 1944, Germany. Sprawling Nazi factories, fattened by the wealth of conquest and methodically mobilized, produced weapons for Hitler's war machine. After surviving the intensive bombing of 43, their assembly lines doubled production. With painstaking German efficiency, the Luftwaffe grew alarmingly stronger. By February, destruction of the mounting Nazi manufacture became urgent because their production was rising to the goal of a plane every 15 minutes. 12 of these factories in Germany and Poland were called point-blank targets and were given top priority. Hitler had looted the manpower and machinery of nearly a dozen European countries. Hermann Goering, his time running out, spawned reinforcements and new weapons. Thus, the Luftwaffe had become a massive shield for Fortress Europe. At the same time, steel centers like Dusseldorf and Essen forged mountains of bombs and shells. A key to this production was the transport system. All the supply lines, including canals, were full. The enemy war machine rolled on after a winter during which weather had prevented large-scale Allied air attacks.
On 19 February, weather cleared. Now we started the long-planned attack against the Luftwaffe to win control of the skies over Europe, no matter what the cost. This was to pave the way for invasion. General Eisenhower and his air officers, General Spaatz and Kepner, watched our joint effort. Most of us came from Doolittle's 8th Air Force and Bill Kepner's Fighter Command. The stiffest resistance was expected. To protect 1,000 bombers, we were sending along 1,000 fighters. We were going to destroy the Luftwaffe from the bottom up. Not see factories, not see airdromes, and not see planes in the sky. Most of General Pete Quesada's 9th Air Force fighter boys had come from units of the 8th. The battle-wise general had helped drive the Luftwaffe out of Africa. Now Quesada was getting us ready for a series of operations which free people will always remember as the Big Week. Sunday morning, 20 February. We prepared for the heaviest assault in the history of the American Strategic Air Forces up to that time. Doubtful weather and a stronger Luftwaffe made this a big gamble. Some expected possible losses up to 200 bombers and crews. This was the prelude to invasion. Generals Brereton, Spaatz, and Vandenberg hurried to join the show.
American heavy bombers from Britain and the Mediterranean and all the RAF could muster, the equivalent of 5 air forces, were about to hit the Nazis for 6 consecutive days and nights. In the biggest air blitz of the war, the Allies hoped to finally win air superiority over the Luftwaffe. The liberation of Europe was at stake. Now, for the first time, the AAF had the strength to mount a saturation offensive. Some bombers went to attack airfields and rocket launching sites to pull enemy strength away from the war factories, our main objective. At fighter bases, all fighter command elements were raising the curtain for the prelude to invasion. Takeoff signals marked a change in the basic use of all fighters. Until now, they had only escorted the bombers. This was expanded. Today's orders were, pursue and destroy the enemy. Success of the Allied offensive depended on these escort fighters.
Our bombers plowed into enemy air, although we knew they had us spotted. We tried to make our main effort appear as a two-pronged drive on Berlin. Ignoring the flak, we kept in close formation for maximum self-protection as our thunderbolts caught up.
Forewarned, the enemy massed his fighters. They were as determined to stop us as we were to destroy them. Control of the sky, German sky, was the prize. The Mustangs dropped their wing tanks and plunged into the fight. Leading was an Ohio boy, Captain Don Gentili. Another hot rod, Colonel Francis Gabreski from Pennsylvania, joined the fight. In the same outfit was Indiana's Major Walker Mahurin.
Yes, we bomber boys were in good hands. But enemy flak explosions were heavy, accurate, and intense. The Germans closed in. crash formation of Mustangs, some of Colonel Blakesley's bachelors. They came down from almost invisible heights to engage the enemy. Belgium, France, and Holland, our B-26 Marauders evaded flak and unloaded over enemy airdromes. The brass hoped the weight of these bombs would force the Nazis to move their airfields inland. The plan, guided by General Sammy Anderson's boys, was succeeding. Over Germany, it was the same thing. First 5 days changed the history of the air war, but it didn't end here. By March, we hit Berlin for the first time. The weight of our attacks increased and held down enemy plane production. As the bombs fell, we pressed our advantage, barreling in to force the Luftwaffe into combat. American fighters, without let-up, went after anything that could hurt us. This was no longer a prelude to invasion. This was invasion.
Point-blank offensive was the culmination of the strategic air war that airmen had long advocated. The strong shield of Hitler's fortress, the Luftwaffe, had been swept away. As General Eisenhower proudly said, "The air did everything we asked." They cleared the way for invasion. The Allies had attained freedom of the air with the combined long-range strategic bombing and tactical operations of the United States Air Force. Spring 1944, occupied France. Over Fortress Europe, standing silent sentry, was the highly developed German radar system. By June, 3 days before D-Day, enemy strength in Holland, Belgium, and France had been increased to 60 divisions. German headquarters expected an invasion, but wasn't sure where. Quite accidentally, the crack 352nd Wehrmacht Division was ordered on beach maneuvers to a sector in Normandy which the Allies secretly picked as Omaha Beach. The Atlantic Wall was being reinforced. Thinking the Allies intended to strike directly across the channel at its narrowest point, the enemy kept strong forces in the area and heavily fortified the Pas-de-Calais coastline. High German brass inspecting fortifications facing England ordered heavier defenses. Ever alert and expecting to drive the invaders back into the sea, the enemy hoped his fortress was impregnable.
June 5th, London. The waking metropolis didn't know General Eisenhower had given us the final decision. The invasion of France would start this night. All southern England was a military camp. For days, our troops had been boarding invasion transports. If ever there was a German bomber's paradise, it was a harbor like Portsmouth. What sitting ducks we could have been. But our air forces had cleared the way for invasion. Late in the afternoon before D-Day, Eisenhower, Spots, and Brereton came to Newbury. At headquarters of the 101st Airborne, they visited with the paratroopers who were getting ready to embark on their hazardous mission. Many of them told their Supreme Commander that as soon as they dropped in France, everything would be taken care of. But the general and the private weren't kidding each other. As spearhead of the invasion, thousands of airborne troops were going to drop behind enemy lines.
Before the first assault takeoff, in each man's ears rang Eisenhower's inspiring order of the day.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeats. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage war on the ground. The tide has turned. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking.
This was really it. Here we were, the 9th Troop Carriers vaulting the Channel, the vanguard of the Second Front, 1 British and 2 American divisions. Our mission, to drop them behind German fortifications to flank and secure the invasion zone. Tough young men making history, which some of them would never get a chance to read. Historic France, with memories of ancient invaders, was being invaded again. This time, airplanes had ferried hosts of Allied warriors to the Normandy battleground. The element of surprise was effective as airborne troops, some led by General Matthew Ridgway, dropped in the appointed areas behind the proposed landing beaches. Now the battle to control the gateway to France. Men we had delivered from the skies were launching the liberation of Europe.
All this time, hundreds of troop-laden invasion craft were leaving England. June saw the highest winds and roughest seas experienced in the English Channel for 20 years. D-Day was no picnic.
At busy airfields ranging from Devon to Lincolnshire, we marked our aircraft with D-Day stripes and loaded them with reinforcements. Everything from motorcycles to howitzers and armies of men. Last-minute hookups were ordered. Almost a year ago, we had run a similar glider operation to Sicily. Then, as now, under the watchful eye of men like General Hoyt Vandenberg, we prepared for the big show. The plan, after a night drop, now called for reinforcements. These slow-moving, unarmed gliders lumbered off and headed for Normandy to accomplish a miracle. We were engaged in more than airlifting troops and weapons. Air power, leading actor in the prelude to invasion, now played another important role in the unfolding drama that was D-Day. Airplanes commanded by Generals Kepner, Anderson, Quesada, and Wayland rolled off British fields to cover and directly support the Allied armies about to hit the beach. The pre-D-Day timetable also called for our planes to warn the French, planes to divert the enemy, planes to smash German radar and communications, planes to attack rail centers, bridges, and airfields. 8,000 planes dispatched to isolate the battle area from the rest of France and help the Allies grab a foothold on Western Europe. As we left England, all of us felt the high drama of armies of men joined in a historic flight across the Channel.
Bearing witness to the mighty spectacle were the Allied seaborne forces escorting the U.S. First Army and the British Second Army for the great assault. The invasion schedule now called for a tremendous naval overture.
Climaxing the attack, we went in to demolish critical bridges, key roads and rail arteries leading into the battle area, as well as German radar and fortifications along the coast. By D-Day, 74 tunnels and bridges leading to Normandy were put out of business. No one would have given our reinforcements and wooden gliders better than an even chance of living through the next hour, much less the next day. They were wrong. We had a lot in our favor. We had mastery of the air. We achieved complete surprise. And we had guys with guts and faith in freedom on our side. Flying cover over the invasion armada, we watched our guys get ready to hit the beach. Even the Germans didn't interrupt the show. No U-boats, practically no Luftwaffe. Freedom was on the march.
Not realizing the extent of the force opposing them, the Germans tried to stop the invasion.
General Ike had promised his assault troops, if you see any airplanes, don't worry, they'll be ours. He was right. We were there with a vengeance. We flew in at right angles to the British assault points on the American beaches we called Omaha and Utah. Paving the way, we bombed continuously until minutes before the landing. Then, racing toward the beach, the assault force opened up.
Hour, and waves of free men hit the beach. Normandy, from the Cherbourg Peninsula, eastward to the mouth of the Seine, shook with a tremendous roar of battle. Crust of the German west wall was broken. The landing stuck. Unceasingly, the Allies poured men and materiel into the flame-swept rim of France. Try as he would, the enemy could not push the Allies into the sea. Our planes hunted the German Air Force. Where were they? The crippled Luftwaffe had been pulled back to defend their fatherland. Protected by Allied air power, the road to final victory was open. That moment in history, called D-Day, will never die. It spelled life to those who were enslaved, a time of greatness to those who battled, a lesson to would-be aggressors. D-Day, climax of many forces, was spearheaded by the United States Air Force. Bombers in the world were completing a 5,000-mile flight from San Francisco to Saipan. Less than 4 months before, the island was in Japanese hands. Marines had fought the costly battle. On Columbus Day, 1944, B-29s discovered Saipan.
Our arrival was a real historic event, celebrated with a ballad by a local poet, and it went like this. On the 12th of October, back in 1944, the citizens of Saipan heard a great 4-engine roar, Bulldozers fled the runway. The soldiers stopped to cheer as down came Jolton Josie, the Pacific pioneer. It was a great day for the aviation engineers and service groups who had hacked the airfield out of jungle. To them, Jolton Josie was a sensation who shamelessly stole the show. Some Jap officials already knew that Saipan, as an American base, with its threat of aerial bombardment, spelled eventual defeat for Japan. The landing of the B-29s gave reality to that threat. The new arrivals were men who had flown fortresses and liberators in all theaters of war. They were led by a former 1928 flying cadet, who in 1944 was named Deputy Chief of Air Staff and was now commanding the 21st Bomber Command, General Haywood Hansel.
Well, the first element of the 21st Bomber Command has arrived. When we've done some more fighting, we'll do some more talking. Thank you.
All over the Marianas, B-29s were getting ready to carry out the General's promise. Saipan, Tinian, and Guam had been seized by Admiral Nimitz forces for the primary purpose of serving as bases for the very long-range bombers now parked on circular hard stands. The 21st was building up its massive air power as it prepared for the ultimate crushing defeat of Japan. The long arm of the 73rd Bombardment Wing, led by General Rosie O'Donnell, began punching the enemy with appalling strength. Behind this strength was more than bombs and bullets. There was planning. In January, the 21st Bomber Command changed hands. Major General Curtis E. LeMay replaced Hansel. By sheer weight of attack, LeMay believed he could force a surrender of Japan. To that end, he ordered a furious pace of operations. Here was his weapon, the Superforce, with 2,200 horses warming up in each of its 4 engines. Designed to carry more destruction and carry it higher, faster, and farther than any bomber before, the B-29s were like artillery pointed at the heart of Japan. Each plane was armed with 12 50-caliber machine guns, a 20-millimeter cannon, and 4 tons of bombs. Fully armed, the 21st Bomber Command was taking off for Japan. After day, LeMay sent his bombers out in 100-plane formations to hit Kobe, Nagoya, Tokyo. In 2 months, he increased the attack missions to 200 planes, building to an 800-plane climax. Jap raids had tried to stop the B-29s. They might just as well have tried to stop an onrushing typhoon.
No war was ever fought over such vastness. We who had battled over Berlin, Ploesti, and Schweinfurt knew it. London to Berlin and back was 1,000 miles. The Foggia-Ploesti run, 1150. But Saipan to Tokyo and back was more than 3,000 miles. B-29s were the planes for the job. For all their destructive power, those of us who flew the Superforts felt they were things of beauty. In flight, our navigators were on the spot. An error of 2 degrees could put all of us over nothing but ocean in a plane with empty gas tanks. It was a long ride on the longest, toughest bomber missions in the world. As we approached enemy sky, the crews prepared for the deadly business ahead. While making the slow climb to altitude, our gunners warmed up the central fire control system. Inside a superfort, you can't see a gun. You fire by remote control. We had electronics, superhuman brain power at the flick of a switch. Then we waited for the Japs. Initial point, Mount Fuji, meant we were 60 miles from Tokyo. The leading B-29s found their objectives. Now, below us, Tokyo. Tokyo, which the Jap High Command had boasted was outside the range of land-based American bombers. For 6 months, we had proved them wrong. Satisfied with the results of these high-level precision tactics. Suddenly, in March, he switched to low-level, nighttime, maximum effort fire raids. And Japan's dreams of world empire went up in a flaming inferno.
The B-29s burned out the industrial heart of Japan. One by one, 66 principal cities received their devastating bath of fire until Japan's military situation was hopeless. They could not have held out. They had lost control of the air. Their capacity to wage war was destroyed. The fire raids had even killed much of their fanatical resistance. B-29s were making Japan bleed internally.
Then President Truman made a grave decision. To deliver a special bomb, field orders were signed by General Twining. They instructed Colonel Paul Tibbets and his B-29 crew to drop what they called the gimmick. At 08:15 on August 6th, over military target Hiroshima, Bombardier Major Farabee took over. He was about to drop the atom bomb. Of unprecedented destructiveness had exploded. 3 days later, a second atom bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. Atomic energy had made air power all important. Dread were the threats for the future. Strong the requirement for air power. As suddenly as it started, the war came to an end and surrender ceremonies aboard the Missouri. Without being invaded, without losing a foot of homeland, Japan was surely and utterly defeated. Before the atom bomb, before the Soviet entry into the war, Japan was beaten through the forceful application of Allied land, sea, and air power. The Japanese surrender had come so quickly after mounting the B-29 offensive and the atom bomb climax that advocates of air power felt our most optimistic predictions were confirmed. Fully recognizing the contributions by Army and Navy, General Arnold felt that air power's share in the victory may fairly be called decisive.
In addition to ushering in the atomic age, the war's end marked one of the revolutionary points in the history of warfare. Control of the air proved to be essential to the success of every major military operation. Coordinated planning and command of ground, sea, and air forces, backed up by the full effort of the home front, had enabled the Allies to secure this control of the air. Air power is the technical instrument of our country's defense. Air power can also be the instrument of peace. The United States Air Force has made it apparent to any potential aggressor that an attack on the United States would be immediately followed by a devastating air atomic counterblow. The atomic weapon thus makes air power the primary requisite of national survival. June 1944, the English Channel. A bridge of Allied supply ships streamed into Normandy, and the beachhead grew. A week after D-Day, 500,000 men and their weapons had landed in France. Strengthening the beachhead by advances up to 20 miles, their goal was victory in Europe.
Our aviation engineers had followed the assault waves in. Work began on the landing strips as soon as we unloaded our equipment. Some emergency runways were ready for operations in 6 hours. Around us, the Signal Corps boys strung up over a mile of wire every minute. Communications, reinforcements, and supplies were building up for a powerful offensive designed to break out of the bulging Normandy pocket. We pushed south to gain elbow room, but the planned advance by First Army Commander General Bradley was falling behind Eisenhower's timetable. We kept jabbing toward Saint-Lô in rough hedgerow country, a stubborn struggle against strong enemy resistance.
The Germans, although one counterattack was smashed, rallied again. They ordered up crack parachute regiments and panzer divisions to seal off the Allied beachhead. Hitler ordered his divisions to hold and force a stalemate. Methodically, they scoured the front with fire to prevent any break through Saint-Lô. The German fire was effective. Roads and communications blocked, the Allied advance far down the line came to a halt. These were the worst days of the bloody Normandy campaign. The ground troops dug in and waited for a break.
Those of us in Pete Quesada's 9th Tactical Command had been waiting too. Now, clearing weather gave us a chance to crack the Saint-Lô block. 300 fighter bombers in half an hour. Following us were the heavies. 1,500 were to pass over the target within 60 minutes. A plane every 2 seconds. Cobra was the plan name. With it, Eisenhower hoped to demoralize the enemy in a sector 5 miles long and 1 mile wide. Including medium bombers, nearly 2,400 planes wove this carpet of bombs.
The carpet bombing worked. Now General George Patton could deploy his armored columns for a dash across France. But his right flank would be open, so he made a deal with air for close support. Assured that General O.P. Wayland's 19th Tactical Air Command would provide fighter-bomber protection, Patton plunged towards Germany, 400 miles away. This signaled the start of air-tank warfare with extraordinarily successful results.
Each fighter bomber acted as the eyes of an armored column and communicated by radio phone. Our job was to attack enemy concentrations in advance of our ground forces.
By early September, the Allies, clear of the hedgerows and in command of the situation, now pursued the enemy. Protected and supplied by air, the mobile U.S. Third Army in 1 month was at the doorstep to Germany. Air tank teams in their famous dash across France had opened a road to freedom.
For the first time in military history, an entire German division quit fighting because of pressure from the air. Credit for these punishing attacks goes to the 19th Tactical Air Command. The formal surrender ceremony at Beaugency Bridge was held up until General Wayland could attend. Our 405th Fighter Bomber Group had persuaded German General Elster to surrender his division, consisting of 20,000 officers and men.
Major General Robert Macon represented the Allies in this unique ceremony. As for the German and his troops, they were the victims of 3 weeks of incessant air attacks which had protected Patton's right flank. Accordingly and appropriately, General Wayland, head of the 19th Tactical Air Command, proudly represented his outfit at the ceremony. Their strafing attacks especially helped cage the enemy spirit.
From England and the continent, the directive under which we opened our autumn campaign put German oil in first priority. Next on our target list came munition plants, transportation, and aircraft factories. Our orders were to flatten what was left of enemy war production.
But the Luftwaffe menace was not entirely wiped out. With amazing recuperative powers, with underground factories, with hoarded gasoline, with 350 airfields, the Germans again had air power. General Spaatz reported to Washington that the German Air Force had more fighter planes toward the end of 1944 than ever in its history. On several occasions, the Luftwaffe showed that its new strength could be brought to bear against American bomber formations. Goering raged at his fighter commanders, calling them cowards, and threatened to transfer them into the infantry. Even so, he began to employ his forces in large, concentrated air battles.
Was desperate. Nevertheless, 8th Air Force bombers pushed through to deliver our knockout punch. Suddenly, the Germans attacked. But American air superiority couldn't be shaken. Germany was about to suffer the hell she herself had created. Calibers hammered the Luftwaffe into flaming oblivion. Luftwaffe had shot its last bolt. There was blood in the skies over Germany, German blood. Our final air campaigns now swooped down to spread the paralysis of defeat.
The Nazi war machine, led by ruthless men who had sought to dominate the world, was overwhelmed and crushed to a degree never before experienced in the history of modern war. With final capitulation by German leaders, a great war had been won. The men who won it, the Allied armies, navies, and air forces, had triumphed over a host of relentless, desperate, and powerful enemies. At the Berlin surrender, the U.S. Air Force was ably represented by General Spaatz, who helped lead the Allied air supremacy, which had trampled out the path to victory in Europe. Air power, according to General Hap Arnold, was our margin of success. On this VE Day, he reminded the free world never to forget those men who gave their lives for this victory.
World War II, the large-scale, relentless bombing operations of American air forces gave the world convincing proof of the destructive power of our aircraft. But even while we were showering devastation upon the enemy, our huge bomber fleets were on their way to becoming obsolete. In 1944, a year before the war ended, a new and mighty weapon was in the most crucial phase of its development. A year later, in 1945, this weapon, the atomic bomb, became a reality. A great new force had come into being, one that brought World War II to an abrupt halt, one that was destined to change the whole character of warfare in the future. Much remained to be learned, however, about this newest and most deadly of weapons. So a long and elaborate series of tests was planned and undertaken by the armed services of the United States, in close cooperation first with Manhattan District, and later, after 1947, with the Atomic Energy Commission. In 1946, Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands was the scene of the first of these tests. This was Operation Crossroads. These islands in the Pacific, Bikini, Kwajalein, and Eniwetok, were chosen because no populated areas would be put in danger and because there was an ideal place in which to assemble the 93 naval vessels that were to form the target.
When we arrived at the islands, we saw signs of the heavy fighting that took place here. Little Japanese cemeteries reminded us of those terrific battles. Coming into Eniwetok Island in the weeks preceding the bomb drop were many C-54s, bringing men, supplies, and technical equipment. Operation Crossroads was to be a scientific experiment on a vast scale, both in the quantities of materiel and in the number of personnel. Many thousands of us, from all the armed services and civilian experts, were needed at the islands for the tests. Our air arm had the responsibility not only for logistics, but also for furnishing men and aircraft for the bomb drop, for gathering weather data aloft, for air rescue, for air photography of every phase of the operation, and for operating cloud sampling drones. Kwajalein was the base for our Crossroads B-29s. We needed them in many ways. Every one of them had an important assignment, and all were going to be aloft at H-hour on Able Day. Another chapter in the long and honorable history of the B-29. It was another B-29, the Outlaw, that brought General Curtis LeMay to the islands. He was then Deputy Chief of Air Staff for Research and Development. General LeMay is greeted by Brigadier General Roger Ramey, commander of the Army Air Forces Task Group under Major General William E. Kepner, Deputy Commander for Aviation for the whole operation.
Major Woodrow P. Swancutt, aircraft commander of Dave's Dream, the B-29 that is going to drop the test bomb, holds a final inspection of his crew just before takeoff. Dave's Dream takes off on an historic mission to drop the first atomic bomb directed against naval vessels. Aboard USS Mount McKinley, 14 miles from the target area, Vice Admiral William Blandy, in charge of the entire operation as commander of Task Force 1, and his staff are waiting for H-hour, the big moment when the bomb will fall. Dave's Dream, aloft and ready. Major Swancutt is at the controls, all set as his men are, for the bomb run when he gets the word. Major Harold E. Wood, the bombardier, ready to bring to a climax many months of preparation by a great many people. With Dave's Dream airborne, it's time for the B-17 drones to take off. They will be sent through the cloud mass after the detonation to pick up samples for radioactivity tests. At first, the drones are under control from the ground. Soon, the motherships will take over. Operation Crossroads combined all the features of a full-scale military operation and the conditions of a laboratory experiment of imposing proportions. The ground control pilot now turns the drones over to the mother aircraft. And there she is, more of the B-17 drones are moved toward the target area. The beeper pilot in the nose of the mother aircraft can see on his TV scope right into the cockpit of the drone. When he moves the control stick in the mothership, the controls in the drone respond. 2 C-54s and 8 B-29s are aloft as photographic planes. The big blast is going to be well recorded. Converging on the target, which consists of battleships, cruisers, carriers, destroyers, submarines, merchantmen, and landing craft. Nearly time now for the bomb drop. A naval craft miles away, a wise precaution. H-hour is here. This is the first controlled and fully observed test of an atomic weapon dropped on a military target. The bombs dropped on Japan had ended the war, but we still lacked scientific information on blast pressure, heat, light, and radioactivity. About 8 minutes after the detonation of the Able Day bomb, the B-17s begin their run through the dangerous mushroom cloud. This is the sort of testing possible only under controlled conditions and after elaborate preparations. The drones are a complete success. After their runs through the atomic cloud, they return to base, controlled by mother planes from a distance up to 8 miles. Although the bomb drop was not a bullseye, 5 ships were sunk, one of them a cruiser, and there was heavy damage to many others. We had plenty of evidence that an A-bomb could effectively attack naval formations. Able Day was to be followed by Baker Day, when a submarine blast sank other ships of the target fleet. Operation Crossroads proved again that nuclear weapons had vitally changed the character of warfare. The B-17 drones return still under control of the mother aircraft. The ground control pilot takes over. The landings couldn't be better, even if pilots were aboard the aircraft. The radiological crew gingerly takes over the task of removing the contamination filters. These samples will reveal the exact gamma ray and neutron measurements within the atomic cloud. The filters are placed in lead shipping containers to be sent stateside to Los Alamos and other scientific laboratories for analysis and study. Any aircraft that had been in or near an atomic cloud will carry away some contamination. A washing down method was developed, which makes the cloud sampling aircraft safe and ready for service within 24 hours. Work went forward to convert these barren islands into a fully equipped military installation. Barracks, mess halls, observation posts, runways, a chapel, recreation facilities, and maintenance shops. Because before long, there were to be other A-bomb tests here. Operation Sandstone in 1948, and Operation Greenhouse in 1951.
Also, from 1951 on, for those of us who worked on the new A-bomb testing range in Nevada, another important program was in progress. We decided to find out what the effect of atomic bombs on grounded aircraft would be. So a number of airplanes, some of them obsolete, others of the latest types, were set up in the target area at various angles to the blast point. Test buildings were targets too, some of them of sturdy construction. Aboard a C-54, a group of flight surgeon volunteers are about to test their visual reaction to the actual flare of an atomic blast, because it is important to learn the effect of terrifically brilliant atomic light on the eyes of aircraft crews. Examination proved that none of the flight surgeons suffered any permanent eye damage. test, we in the Air Force increased our knowledge of the new and fearsome weapon. And even while these tests continued, with improved and more powerful A-bombs, a new development of vast importance was in progress. In January 1950, it was revealed that President Truman had directed the Atomic Energy Commission to continue its work on a weapon of even more overwhelming destructive force, the thermonuclear or hydrogen bomb. Thus, it happened that after years of intensified effort by our scientists, the most terrible of all the weapons that man has ever built, the H-bomb, was detonated at Eniwetok. Let us hope that the time never comes when we must use it. But if that time does come, the men, the machines, and the know-how will all be a part of the readiness of the United States Air Force.